You know, it's a rainy, miserable January night. There are some in UKIP, of course, who would blame the weather on government policy. I'm not one of them, but we'll come to that in questions, I'm sure. And one of the things I'm really proudest of is this is a proper, genuine, voluntary political party. And my congratulations to UKIP here in Northwich for putting on a meeting that has filled this room to the rafters. It's something I reckon none of the other parties could do on a wet January night in Northwich. So my congratulations to all of you. And these are genuine public meetings. Whether you come along tonight because you're a committed UKIPper, that's marvellous. Whether you come along tonight and you're unsure, that's marvellous. Whether you come along tonight because you absolutely want to make sure that you really do hate me, you're also welcome. You're also welcome. Because we're the only party in British politics doing this now. We're the only party in British politics daring to hold public meetings, and I will have my say, and then you will have your say. And within reason, you can say and ask what you like. Now, before I go on, just to get a little bit of audience participation, could I see a show of hands from all of those in this room who are not members of UKIP? Goodness gracious me. Right, now would you lock that door and the one over there? Right, well that's absolutely, that says to me that 75% of you, are not the faithful that I'm speaking to, and it's absolutely great to see you. I wasn't in politics. I left school at 18, went straight into the City of London, dealt in the commodities business, dealing in copper, aluminium, that sort of thing. I'd never stood even for local council. I had no ambitions or aspirations to be in politics at all. And do you know something? Having spent 20 years in business and then coming into politics, I think makes me rather better qualified than the bunch of college kids that are running the Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat party. I mean, they've all got the same backgrounds, haven't they? They all come from extreme privilege, they all go to good schools, they all go to Oxford, they all do PPE, and they all at the age of 23 become researchers. They're members of Parliament by the time they're 28, they've never had a job, they've never worked in the real world, they have no understanding or connection with the thoughts, hopes and aspirations of ordinary British families. There is a massive disconnect. And to make it worse, they look the same, they sound the same, and in terms of policy, frankly, you can barely put a cigarette paper between them. The British press plays up the differences between these parties, but if you really boil it down, the differences are very small indeed. And I say that because we're not a party of single-issue obsessives, but the fact, ladies and gentlemen, is that membership of this European Union, and there are some in this room, of course, who will have voted in the referendum back in 1975. Anybody over the age of 58 have a chance to vote in that referendum? One or two of you I can see do qualify.
Don't age me.
Many of us, of course, were far too young. But what you voted for was for us to stay part of a common market, not to be part of an organisation that now makes 75% of our laws. To be part of an organisation that says we cannot decide what light bulbs to put in our houses, what weed killer to use in our drives. We can't decide how we run our financial services industry. We can't actually decide sensibly how we run our energy industry. All our employment legislation, all our health and safety at work legislation. And I'm not advocating sending kids back up chimneys. But I do think the fact that it needs 3 men to hold the ladder whilst one climbs up it suggests we might have taken this stuff a bit too far. And on all of these levels, there is nothing these guys can do about it. And for years and years and years, it was very difficult to put the Eurosceptic case and to make people understand. But now I believe that anybody that's involved in business, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, knows and understands who wins the next general election, frankly, is irrelevant to their business. But there's an even bigger issue that I think has brought home to the British people the sheer level of impotence of the British government in governing and controlling these islands. Because what could be a more fundamental point of whether you are a self-governing nation than the whole question of deciding who should come to live, work and settle in our islands? Yes, I'm talking about immigration. The debate we're not supposed to have. Because it isn't polite, is it? We might frighten the horses, not in front of the children. The only people that discuss immigration are the extremists. Well, we have discussed immigration, openly and clearly and fairly. And let me just say to everybody in this room, you know, if you've come along tonight expecting to hear some sort of anti-foreigner rant, you're not going to get it. Because we're not anti-European. We don't dislike Europeans, and we don't dislike Europe. And it may shock some of you to know that I am actually married to a girl from Hamburg. All right? So no one needs to tell me about the dangers of living in a German-dominated household. All right? We love Europe, but we want a Europe of different nation-states trading together, cooperating together, being friends together, trying to be good next-door neighbours with each other, though recognising with the French that won't necessarily be possible. But not a Europe that has a flag, an anthem, and a president called Herman Van Rompuy. That is not something we want. And one of the main consequences of it is that we now have a total open door, an unrestricted door, to migration from very poor countries in Eastern Europe. You know, the minimum wage in Romania is about 10% of what it is here. And if I was a young guy living in Bucharest, I'd come to England. I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? Do you know, if you're a young guy that's got a wife and 2 kids in Bucharest, and you come to work in England, within 3 months, you will qualify for child benefit for those kids, despite the fact they've never left Romania. And the child benefit alone will be more than you can earn working in a low-paid job in Bucharest. So I don't want to scapegoat Romanians, Bulgarians, or Poles, or anybody. I want to scapegoat the gutless political establishment in this country that has allowed a situation to exist where youth unemployment in this country has doubled since 2004, and where skilled and semi-skilled men and women have seen wage compression so that many of them are taking home less pay than they were 10 years ago. I'm scapegoating these gutless people that call themselves our leaders, based in Westminster, and not anybody of foreign extraction. All right? And I want us, going on into the future, to be a country that is open and welcoming to people from foreign lands. But I want immigrants who come to this country to actually operate on the same basis as Australia does. They've got this right. Australia have got this right. Australia says, we welcome immigration to this country under our control, and we want men and women who've got skills and who will benefit our society to come to Australia. But we don't want people to come to Australia if they've got a serious criminal record, which is funny really, because it used to be a prerequisite, didn't it? Well, having smashes in the cricket, I've got to get my own back somehow. Although not today, I'm pleased to say. You know, we don't want people with life-threatening diseases. And John Howard, when he was Prime Minister, said something that I think sums up the way many of us feel. He said, we don't care what colour you are, we don't care what religion you are, we don't care what country you came from, but if you come to live and settle in Australia, you will become Australian and become part of our community and part of our dream. Isn't that the vision we want for a united Britain where we can live and work together? And I think, you know, that is the issue above all that has really made the great mass of the British public realise the extent to which we're not governing our own country. Now, of course, one of the consequences of mass open-door immigration has been a population rise, the likes of which we've never seen in modern times in these islands. And that has put massive, massive pressure on something that I care about very much indeed, which is England's green and pleasant land. I say that because I still live in the same village in which I was born. I live on the North Downs of Kent, just south of London. We are prime greenbelt territory. It's still a lovely place to live, and yet I can be in Westminster within the hour. But the kind of pressures that we're facing are the kind of pressures that you're facing here in Cheshire too. And the problem is partly that we have an exploding population. But the other problem is that the big developers have just the most massive influence with our political class at Westminster. And if you're a developer, you don't want to build and develop some grubby old brownfield site because it's jolly expensive. You've got to clean it up and detoxify it. Now what you want as a developer is a nice little bit of greenbelt. And it was always thought in the past that it would be the Labour Party that would build houses in vast numbers, but the Conservative Party that would protect rural England and greenbelt. And what we've learned from this Conservative government is that frankly they're in bed with the developers, and Nick Bowles, the Development Minister, has made it clear he wants as much building to take place on greenbelt land as is possible. And I have to say, we don't need to do that. Do you realise there are 750,000 empty properties in Britain's big cities? Wouldn't it make more sense to provide social housing for British people that need it in those empty flats above shops in British towns and cities, and to save the greenbelt and to protect England's green and pleasant land? Wouldn't that make more sense? And perhaps, just perhaps, the penny is starting to drop on another of these great political follies, and one that our EU membership has compounded and made much worse. And I'm talking about the whole issue of global warming. Remember 20 years ago? We'd had the miners' strike, we'd reduced the number of pits in Britain by 2/3, and yet they'd become so efficient, they were producing the same amount of coal we had before we closed 2/3 of the pits. We had one of the most efficient and modern, brilliant coal mining industries in the whole of the Western world. And Michael Heseltine, and I don't generally get personal about other politicians, well I did with Herman Van Rompuy once, but no, I don't generally get personal, but I do reserve, I must say, a particular hostility for the arrogance of Mr. Heseltine. Mr. Heseltine was an early convert to the idea that carbon dioxide emissions were leading to global warming and would destroy humanity. And so he closed down the British coal mining industry. And that was the beginning of this great folly that the Labour, Lib Dems and Conservatives have all run headlong into. And as a result of our membership of the European Union, we have decided that by the year 2020, we will produce 20% of our energy from renewable sources. It sounds in a way rather nice and cuddly, doesn't it? But the reality is that what we are doing is we are building thousands, we are building thousands of onshore and offshore wind turbines, because this apparently is going to guarantee our electricity supply for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, it is one of the most ugly, expensive mistakes we have ever made in this country. And even if you were worried that CO2 emissions will lead into global warming, understand this. This country only produces 2.5% of the world's CO2 output. And even if this is a problem, given that India and China between them are building 4 new coal-fired power stations every week, what on earth are we doing building wind technology, loading what will be by 2020 up to 20% on the electricity price of every consumer bill, and doing something to British manufacturing industry which is nothing short of disastrous? You see, as we've gone down this route, those in the world that are rather brighter than us and don't do what European commissioners tell them have gone the other way. The Chinese and the Indians are going for coal in a massive way. The Americans have gone for shale gas in a massive way. So right at the very moment when our industrial competitors have gone for cheap energy, we have gone for expensive energy. So is it any wonder that both the aluminium smelters in this country have closed in the last few years? Is it any wonder that almost all of our steel production has gone overseas? And it's not until you go and visit a manufacturing plant that you actually understand how much power manufacturing needs. You know, the Ineos plant in Runcorn uses more electricity than the whole of the city of Liverpool. It's stunning, isn't it? But it makes you realise just how important cheap energy is if we want Britain to be a successful manufacturing economy. And I have to say that what we stand for in UKIP is not environmental vandalism, is not irresponsibility, but frankly, we think these climate change targets should be scrapped. They should be scrapped because, as I say, all the while India and China are building 4 new coal-fired power stations every week, why on earth should we unilaterally commit industrial harry-carry? It doesn't make any sense. So we are committed as a party to stopping this ludicrous wind energy project. Oh, and by the way, did you know that Ed Miliband's wife earns her living as a lawyer working in environmental affairs? So her job is to push through wind farm applications. That Miriam Clegg was for some years a director of the largest Spanish wind farm energy company. Oh, and I almost forgot. David Cameron's father-in-law gets paid £1,000 a day just for having wind turbines sited on his estate in North Lincolnshire. It represents a massive transfer of wealth in Britain from poor people to rich people. The wretched things don't work when the wind doesn't blow, and they have to be switched off when the wind blows too much. And because of that lack of reliability, you have to have 100% backup. And we're told that possibly by the year 2015, the lights could go out. But can you imagine that? The lights could go out. Now, I just about remember the power strikes back in the 1970s, and they were rather fun, really. Jolly good excuse not to do homework, I must say. But now we're living in a computer and technology-driven world. Can you imagine what the implications would be for this country in terms of its trade and its economy if we lose power, and yet our political class are so gutless and useless and supine that in terms of meeting these ridiculous targets, they're leaving us exposed to possibly the lights going out in 2015. And I think that what we represent in UKIP is a group of people who've come together from all walks of life. I regard myself as a hard-nosed pragmatist, not frightened of addressing real issues. And I think that's why this party has started to take off. We've started to take off because there is a collective loss of confidence in our political class in Westminster. We've started to take off because many people can see that some of the big calls and predictions that UKIP have made have come true. We've started to take off because people actually rather like the fact that we're not afraid to say what we think. We've got a sense of humour. Yeah, sure. There may be the odd rough edge to UKIP, but isn't it better to have the odd rough edge than what we've got, this highly polished machine that doesn't actually say or do anything? And I think we're taking off because no longer will you come to a UKIP meeting and hear me or anybody else telling you how blooming awful Europe is and how awful everything is. We're talking about solutions. We're talking about cheap energy. We're talking about deregulating our industries and giving manufacturing a chance. We're talking also about addressing the problem in this country of social mobility. I mean, how could it be right that the 7% of people who go to the private schools in Britain are now dominating industry, business, commerce, the media, and even over 50% of our gold medal winners in the Olympics went to those 7% of people. The class system in Britain actually is widening and deepening with every year that goes by, and there are tens of thousands of very, very bright children, boys and girls, who are not achieving their best. Do you know, in the mid-1960s, 50% of the youngsters that went to Oxford and Cambridge came from what would be called working class backgrounds, right? That figure is now 11%. And what that means, folks, is that we are wasting some of the best, brightest and most brilliant talent in this country by not giving them the educational opportunities that they need to succeed. And my view, and the view of our party, is that one of the most wanton acts of social destruction in this country was the abolition of the grammar schools in the 1960s and the 1970s. And let's bring back selection and give our bright kids a chance. So again, it's UKIP being positive and not being negative. Now, we've had one or two big successes. By-elections in which we've surprised everybody, and a set of English County Council elections on May the 2nd last year that I have to say stunned everybody, including me. You know, the fact we got nearly a quarter of the vote. But in just a few months from now, we've got, I think, a very big opportunity. We've got the European elections taking place on May the 22nd this year. The last time they were contested in 2009, we stunned the establishment by coming second and beating Gordon Brown's governing Labour Party of the day. I mean, that really did feel very good, I must say. The Tories won those elections in 2009, with their leader David Cameron campaigning on the fact that he had given the British people a cast iron guarantee. Do you remember that? Yeah. Cast iron guarantee that if he became Prime Minister, there would be a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. And he wonders why we don't believe him this time, Mr. Chairman. I really do think that we have got the possibility to bring together voters, Conservative voters, old Labour voters, Lib Dem voters, non-voters, young and old, and right across the spectrum. I believe UKIP has the opportunity on May the 22nd to cause an earthquake in British politics by winning those elections. I really do. If we do that, everything will change. If we do that, the position of David Cameron as Prime Minister will be open to doubt. Certainly the position of Nick Clegg as leader of the Liberal Democrats will be open to doubt. The ability of Miliband to look like a clear winner next year would also be in doubt, but perhaps more significantly, if we do well in those elections and equally well in the local elections that are being fought on that day, we will then be able to go into 2015 with the realistic chance of getting a serious number of UKIP MPs elected into Westminster. And my ambition and my aim is that we should be in the position in 2015 that Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats were in 2010. That we be in that position where we hold the balance of power. And I promise you one thing, folks, when we get to that position, there will be a referendum and we will decide our future and we will take our country back. Well, that's the easy bit. You see, I've told you now what I'm going to do and what we're going to do. But I now want to ask you, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Vote UKIP. So, well, vote UKIP is a start, sir. That is a starter for 10, and I like that. But is that all you can do for me? Couldn't you do a bit more for me? I mean, couldn't you take a few leaflets down the pub and talk to your mates? Well, there we are. I'll come with you, no problem at all. You've got to do market research, you know. What I'm saying to you is this. You know, for those of you that come along tonight, having never been to a UKIP meeting before, if you leave here tonight satisfied with what you've heard, satisfied with the questions that you're about to ask us, if you leave here believing that we are trying genuinely to take back our country, trying to hand on to our children and grandchildren the freedoms that those that went before us actually fought and died for in many cases so that we could have, if you leave here tonight believing in those things and believing that we are a sincere group of people that are not doing this for career, we're doing this for our country, then really my challenge is to you, what are you going to do? Because this is a volunteer army. And I'm asking you to join us, to give us a few bob, to put posters up on your walls or windows, to try and encourage other people to come and support us. You know, this idea that really started with Blair, that all politics could be decided by the soundbite on the television, is rubbish. Real politics happens locally. Real politics happens round the family kitchen table. Real politics happens in the golf club, in the bridge club, in the Women's Institute. Real politics happens where people get together and talk to each other. And real politics comes when people say to their friends and their mates and their family, listen, I've met these UKIP people, I believe in them, they are trying to change this country for good. So my challenge to all of you here who have not yet committed, I almost said converted, but I'm not Billy Graham, all right? But my challenge to you who have not yet committed is if you leave here tonight satisfied, then please, 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 lend us a hand, because all it needs, is a couple of 100,000 of us around this country to get together and fight for what we believe in, and we will get it. Thank you.
Okay, so now the fun part. I'd like to open the floor to some questions. So I ask, who has the first question? There's a keen hand just there, young gentleman. Please stand up, tell us who you are, where you come from, and then your question.
Well, I have a number of questions firstly, so is that okay?
One per member.
Okay, I'm Louis McAvoy, 17 years old, come from Kelsall. And my question for Mr. Farage is this. Oh, sorry.
We'll repeat it for you, don't worry.
Okay. Mr. Farage claims that 75% of laws in Britain are made in Brussels. But if you check in the House of Commons library, it's actually less than 10%. 75% of laws in Britain are approved in Brussels, not made. So I'm asking, are you misconstruing facts to further your own political agenda?
Right. The question was that I claim that 75% of our laws are made in Brussels, but the House of Commons library says it's less than 10%. Am I fabricating things to make up the UKIP argument? Well, let me tell you this. In Germany, Roman Herzog, who was president of Germany in the 1990s, after he retired, became concerned at what had happened to German democracy. Democracy, very much a post-1945 concept in Germany, and actually, when the Germans finally got a proper democratic system, they made it work rather well. Roman Herzog did a report, and he found that between 1998 and 2006, of federal laws made in Germany, 84% had originated in the European Union. So it may well be that of national laws in Britain, our estimate of 75% may, I agree with you sir, be too low. It may be too low. The way the House of Commons fiddle the figures is they add in every single traffic regulation made by a local authority and class those as laws to try and get the percentage down. But I promise you, I've got friends of mine who sit in the House of Commons, and no longer does the British House of Commons discuss the great vital issues about the health and well-being of British business and British industry. That has all now been subcontracted out to the institutions of the European Union, and all that Parliament does now is to have a whole regular series of committee meetings, televised committee meetings, where they call people in and grill them, but actually in terms of making legislation, they don't do anything. And that's why British general elections have been traduced to a debate about health and education. They are the only questions that have been debated, really, by Labour and Conservatives at the last 3, maybe 4 general elections, because they're the last things the British government actually has any say over. So no, I absolutely defend the figure that I put to you. I point out that actually in Germany they recognise that figure to be worse. And I want to say this to you as a 17-year-old. I absolutely believe that the form of government that we created in this country, backed up by the principles of Magna Carta, where there was no imprisonment without charge, where we were presumed innocent before we were guilty, and where we had the ability to call on 12 of our fellow men and women to judge in a trial whether we were innocent or guilty. Britain may have done many things wrong over the years, but in terms of providing the fairest legal system and the best form of parliamentary democracy, we should apologise to no one in the world because we've done it better than anybody, and we should not surrender it to these rotten institutions that are undemocratic and are not working in our interests.
Who has the next question? Gentleman in the right. Do you want to stand up? Tell us who you are, where you come from, please.
My name is Brian Tinsley. I'm from Leigh, Greater Manchester. My question to the leader is, can he expand any more on the HS2 rail project that will affect a lot part of this country? Now, in London, I have a couple of lads live there, and I understand where they live. It's a very big Conservative constituency around there. And they're saying, no, we're going to go underground, tunnel it, and save all this valuable property. Can you put any light on what's going to happen with this, or we're just going to steamroll like everything else?
I'm going to be, tomorrow morning, I'm going to be in Manchester, or to be more precise, I should be in Sale East in Wythenshawe, where UKIP have picked an excellent candidate to fight the by-election. But tomorrow afternoon, I've got 3 meetings tomorrow afternoon and evening. It's a good job I've got a strong voice, isn't it? And I'm going to be in Buckinghamshire tomorrow afternoon, doing 3 separate meetings down the HS2 route. Can I say this to you, sir? I actually think this country does need more investment in its railways. And I say that because, do you know, it takes 5 hours, 11 minutes to get from Paddington to Penzance. It was quicker in August 1914 to get to Penzance than it is now. If you try and go by train from London to Norwich, or any of those towns and cities out in East Anglia, it takes forever because the lines are desperately old-fashioned. There are 150,000 people, and I was one of them this morning, who stand for more than half an hour every single morning and every single evening going to and from their place of work in London. And I know that some of the northern cities also have those problems. So we do have a problem with the rail network. But we don't have a problem, in my opinion, with the London to Manchester railway. Because I regularly go from London to Manchester. I think Virgin run a pretty good service, actually. And you know what? I get on a train in Euston, and in 2 hours, 2 minutes, I get out, not on the outskirts of Manchester, I get out in Manchester Piccadilly. I'm in the middle of the business district of Manchester in 2 hours and 2 minutes. I do not buy the argument that cutting that by 45 or 50 minutes would actually make much difference to the economy of this country at all. And actually, all the experience in France, and remember France is 2.5 times the size of this country, all the experience of France, when they built the TGV, is that actually, the more cities became closer in time to Paris, the more business it drove to Paris, not to the outlying centres. So I don't even buy the argument that it'll help the northwest economy. And how it'll help the economy of this constituency, with trains rattling through at 186 miles per hour, frankly, is beyond me. And the cost of it. Hasn't anyone noticed we're skint? We're skint. I mean, the elephant in the room of British politics is that we're still borrowing. In the 4th year of this coalition, we'll be borrowing £110 billion more than we earn. And the most stunning statistic is this. At the end of this 5-year coalition, our national debt, which we've been building up since we took on Napoleon, our national debt will have increased by 40% in the lifetime of this coalition government. And we are leaving a legacy. We are leaving a repayment legacy. And bear in mind, base rates of 0.5% won't last forever. You know, many in this room who I'm sure had mortgages in the early 80s and found life a shock at 17 and 18%. And we're storing up a massive repayment problem for our children. So I am completely and utterly opposed to the HS2 project. Only 2% of the travelling public of this country go from London to Manchester. 2%. And the other 98% are going to get a rotten deal for the benefit of 2% who will have to pay exorbitant fares. They're pretty dear now, aren't they? But exorbitant fares to use it. Frankly, I think the thing is a project, once again, of great political vanity and folly, and we are wholeheartedly, as a party, opposed to it, but for upgrading the rail networks in this country for a third of the cost to the benefit of millions.
My name is Amanda Miller and I'm Cheshire born and bred. If Britain were to pull out of Europe, would that constitute some form of breach of contract? What would be the legal ramifications, the ongoing cost of that, and would there be any financial penalties that would have to bear well into the future?
Okay, Amanda asked the question, and I have to say, Amanda, I didn't like the question. You said, if Britain were to pull out of the European Union. We don't want any of that sort of talk, Wilson, do we? It's when Britain pulls out, will we effectively be in breach of contract? Will there be terrible penalties to pay? I mean, that basically is your question, is, you know, can we do this legally? And can we do this without it being a very bloody, nasty, unpleasant business? Is that the gist of your question? Right, they've all got that now. There's never been a treaty in the history of mankind that hasn't been broken at some point in time. Indeed, there is a Vienna Convention on how to break treaties. What is interesting about our position is this, that the Treaty of Lisbon became law in this country a few years ago. I wish it hadn't. I wish Cameron had honoured his pledge for us to have a referendum, but the Treaty of Lisbon became law. And much as my natural temptation is to set fire to the thing, we have to actually respect the rule of law. That is the law of the land. The Queen gave her assent to that treaty. That treaty has within it a legal roadmap through which we divorce ourselves from European Union. It's called Article 50. We invoke Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, and it's written down very clearly. That is a statement of our intention to leave the European Union, and it gives us a breathing space of up to 2 years while we sort out what the alternative arrangements will be. And in that intervening period of up to 2 years, we are totally protected in terms of trade and some of the things that the scaremongers, like Clegg, Miliband and Cameron, would have us believe. So the first part, you know, the first answer to your question is, legally, there is a roadmap there that we can use to do this. I very much hope that it doesn't take anything like 2 years to sort this thing out, but I'd rather it took 3 or 4 months than a fortnight if we got something that actually was the right relationship and would serve this country well for many, many decades to come. All right? That is the magnitude and importance of it. Would there be any financial penalties? Do you know, we're currently ploughing into this mob £55 million a day. £55 million a day we pay into an organisation whose accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for 18 years in a row. I mean, you couldn't invent it. It takes somebody of the extraordinary talent of Neil Kinnock to defend it, you know. That's a gross figure. Net, it's over £30 million a day, but much of the money that comes back is spent in ways that you and I honestly would not choose. All right? Now, but can I just go on from that to perhaps the big debate, and it's this. Cameron, Clegg, and the Miliband, they always like that. These guys appear, plus Mandelson pops up and the wretched Kinnock. I've got Kinnock on the brain. They pop up and people that are businessmen appear. Businessmen appear on the BBC. There's a fellow called Sir Andrew Kahn who appears on the BBC. Look out for Sir Andrew Kahn. He's one of the leading business figures advocating Britain must stay in the European Union. Businessman. He spent his entire career working for the European Commission and was Neil Kinnock's chef de cabinet. In the last 5 years, he was a European Commissioner. Age 60, Kahn retired from the Commission with a vast pension, became a non-executive director of a couple of companies, and now speaks as the voice of business. And these people tell us that if we weren't part of this union, they wouldn't buy our widgets. And 3.5 million people would lose their jobs immediately, and within 2 years, we would all be living in caves. All right? Well, that's more or less it, isn't it? First point to make is these are the same idiots who were telling us 12 years ago, if we didn't join the euro, Britain would be sunk. Well, thank God we didn't listen to them 12 years ago and we kept the pound. But more than that, you know, a lot of people in this room would have voted for us to stay in the common market, right? They did so because they'd grown up in a world after the Wall Street crash, after World War II, where actually tariffs on manufactured goods were very, very high. It wasn't uncommon in the early 60s for tariffs on cars or washing machines to be 40% or more. But that world, that solution, was the solution to a problem of the 1960s, not the solution to a problem of 2014. There's something called globalization has taken place. And actually, tariff barriers on manufacturers right across the world have declined to almost nothing. But the real reason why there will be no trade recrimination against the United Kingdom is because we buy from them £45 billion worth of goods more every single year that we sell to them. The United Kingdom is now Germany's biggest export market in the world. Can you imagine Angela Merkel going along cheerily, as she always does? I shouldn't be cruel, but no, I shouldn't. But I did have lunch with her once, and I can let you into a secret that Angela Merkel, actually, if you look at her in public, I can promise you in private, she's even more miserable than she looks. But can you imagine Angela Merkel going to the chief executives of Mercedes, Audi, and saying, Volkswagen, and saying, we're about to enter into a trade war with your biggest trading partner in the world? I don't think so. Economic pragmatism and business will out. You know, Norway trades with the EU without being members. Switzerland trades with them without being members. Mexico trades with the EU on free trade terms without being members. These are pure scaremongering stories, and not only will British business, completely unaffected, go on doing business with the European Union, but here's the positive. The positive is that we will win back the ability to negotiate our own trade deals with other parts of the world, which we're currently forbidden from doing.
Exactly.
We've got some Dutch bureaucrat who negotiates British trade around the world. I want a British minister negotiating trade around the world, and I'll tell you the first place we'll start in broadening British trade around the world. We'll do it with a group of countries that have within them 2.2 billion people. That is 30% of the population of the earth. They speak English, they enjoy common law, they enjoy parliamentary democracy, they have similar contract law to this country, goodness knows they even like us, and stand by our side and defend us when we're in trouble. And the sooner we extend the concept of free trade beyond the realms of Europe and bring back into the British family the Commonwealth of Nations, the better it will be.
Question from the back of the room, if I can. So, I see a hand just there. Would you like to stand up? Tell us who you are, where you come from, please.
My name's Walker, I'm from Northwich. I just wondered where you stood, Nigel, on the armed forces and the defence, given the fact that it's buggering up the armed forces.
Is that a technical expression? Very good. Well, Peter, can I tell you that the current Hammond plan is to reduce the number of regular soldiers in this country to 82,000, which is a figure smaller than we've had since the reign of Queen Anne. But it's okay, there's no problem, because what we're going to do is we're going to abolish the Territorial Army, which has been there for 100 years, and rebrand it and rename it as the Army Reserve, and we'll have 30,000 people in the Army Reserve who are free whenever we want them or whenever we need them for soldiering duties. That is the Hammond plan, all right? Let me tell you, my father is president of the County of London Yeomanry Regiment. He's been in the thing for about 70 years, I think. and is very actively involved with the running of that regiment. When it was the Territorial Army, over the years, recruitment wasn't that difficult because the employers accepted that, you know, Charlie might pop off early on the odd Friday, and Charlie needed a fortnight's camp every year on top of his, you know, normal holiday entitlement, but that was about it for the employer. What increasingly we've done, as the TA has morphed into this new concept of Army Reserve, is Charlie has gone to Afghanistan for 6 months, or Iraq for 5 months. And the employer says, look, you know, if you were being taken for the defence of the realm, because we were being directly threatened, I wouldn't mind. But as you're going off on what many of us see as military adventures abroad that are doomed to failure before we even start, the employers are suddenly finding this a little bit difficult. And I can promise you, they will not get the recruitment in this new Army Reserve to back up the cut in our forces. And I have to say, UKIP draws its vote from across the spectrum. We get, as I said earlier, the Labour vote, the Lib Dem vote, the non-voter. But I come from a family who've been Conservative voters. I come from a family that have had many generations that have served in the army. And I have to say that it beggars belief that it's a Conservative-led government that has not only slashed the army to the size it was during the reign of Queen Anne, but has closed the Portsmouth dockyard and turned that city into a museum, and is slashing our defence spending to below 2%. And as Robert Gates, the former US Defence Secretary, said, you know, Britain is no longer going to be seen as being a serious player in military affairs across the world. And if the Argentinians, and okay, we are more heavily manned than we were in '82, but if the Argentinians did take the Falklands, we wouldn't even have the capability to take it back. And all of that happening at the same time as he's doubling spending on foreign aid, which in many cases is propping up rotten dictatorship.
My name is Trevor Forrester, and I work with Scott, HS2, so it's another HS2 question. But before I do this and ask the question, Nigel, I just want to say that I am one of the 180,000 members of the Conservative Party that have left since David Cameron became the Prime Minister. I'm going on exponentially, and I joined UKIP because of Nigel and because of the policies. Let me just get a question in on HS2. Very important. You know, I deal with all the action groups throughout the UK, probably 300,000 to 400,000 people that are badly affected by HS2, and UKIP is the only major party that will kill HS2. Thank God. Now, I think before I get to the question, the first thing I'd like to say is that if Her Majesty calls you to the Buckingham Palace to form a government, I'm quite happy that HS2 will be stopped. Perfectly happy. And whatever you say, I'd really like you to say to all of the people that are affected by HS2 about the situation if we form a coalition. That the question that I'm asked regularly, because I've pushed down the line now, no votes for you with HS2. So any political party that supports HS2 don't get affected people's HS2 vote. And that's 300,000 to 400,000 people. And hopefully we can get some of those as members. The question being, I think, Nigel, is that we want to see HS2 as a red line. And if you form a coalition, can you warrant to us that it will still be a red line, and you will stand firm, and just like on Europe, just like on immigration, just like on defence, you will stop it?
Trevor, I thank you for your question, and I welcome you as one of Cameron's lost millions into UKIP. I don't think my position on HS2 could be any clearer. Firstly, from the answer to the gentleman earlier on this evening, and secondly the fact that the whole of my Saturday afternoon and evening is going to be in Buckinghamshire doing HS2 meetings. As I say, I want modern rail travel in this country. I don't want us blowing 50 billion plus on something for a tiny percentage of people in Britain that I don't see for any benefit. If we get to the point in 2015 where we are in a position to possibly join or not join, because remember the option to going into coalition is not going into coalition. I'm not sure that actually appeared, sort of even crossed Clegg's radar. He was so excited about the prospect. The absolute red line for UKIP has to be the referendum on getting control of our country and our birthright back. You know, if that's not on the table, there's not even a negotiation. No. You know, if they're not prepared to talk about that, then Nuttall and I will go to the Marquis of Granby and spend the day there. All right? As for other issues, I cannot and I will not lay down a shopping list right now of things that could potentially be part of a coalition agreement. What you do have my assurance on is that of the 4 or 5 things that I would want to see as being part of a coalition deal, right up at the top below Europe, is reducing excessive government expenditure, because we cannot go on living as we are. Remember, this coalition government was formed to solve the deficit. They've done no such thing. They've done no such thing. So reducing government expenditure to a sensible level where we are not indebting our grandchildren every day would be up there, right behind getting back control of the nation and getting immigration back to sensible levels. And HS2 is absolutely a part of that mix, because no private money will come for HS2. So that will be £50 billion.
100 billion.
Well, maybe 100. I mean, play the Joker and double it, I have no idea. All we know from, you know, the O2 and the Scottish Parliament is whatever estimate you get for a government-led project, it always runs over. So I would suggest to you that without being explicit at this stage about HS2, my commitment to getting government spending down means for me HS2 is an impossible project.
Yeah.